But the concept's called the progressive gaze, Gaze, the progressive gaze, which is a riff on, there's a black novelist named Toni Morrison who talked about writing under the white gaze. And the basic idea that she had was, as a novelist, she wanted to write books out of her own experience and to other African Americans. But she felt like there was this like little white man sitting on her shoulder evaluating everything she did, so that the default assumptions that she was always reckoning with was like a white audience. And this was like this smothered her ability to like be creative and to express herself in the way that she wanted, right? And so it's like a little voice in the head, that hey, you're going to be judged by white readers. That was the idea of the white gaze. I picked that up at some time as just kind of like, oh, interesting, because it was used in the middle of the CRT, kind of all those kind of conversations. And then it occurred to me that actually a lot of evangelicals basically live under the progressive gaze. So that the default, basically, there's a situation where conservative Christians come to have an imaginary progressive in their head or on their shoulder, that shapes their rhetoric, orientation, framing of issues. It's the sort of thing that basically, like, if someone says, "Hey, remember, the world is watching," and the world is by default taken to be coastal, progressive, elite people, as opposed to like coal miner in a red hat who hasn't been to church since he was 8. Like, nobody cares that that guy's watching, but everybody cares that the progressives are watching. That's who we're trying to tailor ourselves to. And you can kind of think about like the ways that in certain, you guys familiar with like Aaron Renn's three worlds framework? Okay. So in neutral world, like 3 features of like neutral world ministry philosophy was like focus on the city, right? So think Keller. So focus on the city, importance of the city. Second, like it's a pluralistic public square. We want to have a seat at the table. And so how do we make sure we have a seat at the table? And then third, how do you get that seat at the table and maintain it? Well, you have to have credibility with progressive audiences. You need to speak in such a way that you're going to speak to their concerns, share their perspectives as much as you can, and then try to connect the gospel to the things that they care about. So that was kind of like, that's the culture. And then also, and that you're differentiating yourself from culture warriors of a previous generation. So the one thing is, we're not like those Christians. We're not moral majority. We're prophetic minority. We're not trying to impose culture war. We're trying to culturally engage, right? So that was kind of neutral world ministry philosophy. Basically, what that did is it led to lots of Christians living under the progressive gaze. And so progressive sensitivities, you have to take those into account. You speak to progressive concerns. You show the gospel subversively fulfills those progressive concerns. And you have to share progressive hostilities and denounce progressive enemies. Okay. So that's the progressive gaze. Basically, what happens then is through that, you absorb by osmosis a lot of really gnarly stuff. So this is how things like critical theory, you didn't even have to read necessarily those books, but you just kind of absorb them by osmosis because it's poisoned upstream. And so you begin to operate, it sounds like this is some of what's going on in your context, that sort of oppressor-oppressed framework, where you have, you pile up a hierarchy of victimhood, that kind of intersectionality, victimhood framework gets piled up. And you basically identify who are the groups that are oppressed, and they're the ones who are always right. You guys just said this, right? Like that's this, you're on that side. It doesn't matter if what they said is true or at least fully true. What matters is that they're hurt. And then typically what happens is you've got that hierarchy. Here's the victim class, the victim classes, and that could be, racially defined, so minorities, particularly African Americans. It could be women. It could be sexual minorities, LGBT, whatever. But all of those immigrants, all of those kind of categories basically become the victim classes that you need to really, you have to demonstrate and continue to demonstrate that you really care about these. How do you do that? Well, you do so by listening to the advocates for those groups. So you have victims and you have advocates. And the advocates are there to like make sure that you stay in line and that you're doing what you ought to do, that you're doing the work. And so you need to do this book study, and you need to put this Facebook post up, and we need to host this event.